Compared to being my disciple, it's going to look like you hate the world. You don't care about your possessions. You don't care about the people that are most important to you because you love me so much. You'll bear your cross, you'll give it all up, and you'll follow me.
Kara writes, "Hi, Dr. E. Did the disciples leave their families to follow Jesus? Were they married with children? It seems that Jesus wouldn't have them abandon wives and children, right?" Thank you, Kara.
A lot of passages we could turn to. Let me read Luke 14:25 to begin with. Now large crowds were going along with him. He turned and said to them, "If anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not carry his own cross and come after me, he cannot be my disciple. For which one of you, when he wants to build a tower, does not first sit down and can calculate the cost to see if he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, when he's laid a foundation and is not able to finish it, all who observe it begin to ridicule him, saying, 'This man began to build, but he was not able to finish.' Or what king, when he sets out to meet another king in battle, will not first sit down and consider whether he is strong enough with 10,000 men to encounter one coming against him with 20,000? Or else, while the other is still far away, he sends a delegation, asks for terms of peace. So then, none of you can be my disciple who does not give up all his possessions." Now, if we took that literally and at face value, we're going to walk away from everybody, sell all our possessions, and follow Jesus.
Well, and Jesus wouldn't say you have to actually hate people when he says the most important commandment is to love God and love your neighbor.
We'll get there. Bingo, okay. You're right.
Okay.
The short answer is no. The short answer is yes and no, which you always love when I say that.
Yes.
We know a man from Nigeria who heard this passage. He was married and had 2 children. He sold most of his possessions, bought a plane ticket to the U.S. to come go to Bible college and seminary, and later on was able to raise funds to bring his family to the States. He took it literally.
Yeah.
Now, as he learned and studied Scripture, he understood what it really meant, but it was impactful to him enough to say he sold his television, his VCR in those days, his car, anything of worth value, left his wife and 2 children in a village.
Yeah.
So, I'm not besmirching that. Much has been written on the language of Jesus, and let's just call it comparative.
Yeah.
Jesus is seriously explaining the cost of discipleship. This is a throwaway passage. But what he's saying is, compared to the way you love me, it'll look like you hate the world and your family. You're right. The 4th commandment, honor your father and mother.
Right.
In New Testament, if you don't take care of your family, you're worse than an infidel. So he's not abrogating the law, not changing it or doing away with it. He's making a comparative story here.
He's being dramatic.
Well, hate is an important word. It's one of these words that we hear it one way in English.
Yeah.
In Old Testament, loyalty and disloyalty would be a good way of talking about it. In Psalm 101, he says, "I hate the work of those that fall away. It shall not fasten its grip on me. Those who do evil will depart from me."
Yeah.
So he's distancing himself from the work and the sinful people in order to be a king. It's an inaugural song. So this is a comparative thing. Compared to being my disciple, it's going to look like you hate the world. You don't care about your possessions. You don't care about the people that are most important to you because you love me so much. You'll bear your cross, you'll give it all up, and you'll follow me. So loyalty is better in this regard than thinking about, I hate my parents. I love Jesus. So loyalty to Jesus is, will you be my disciple? Will you disentangle yourself from worldly affairs to make me your priority?
Yeah. Well, essentially take idols off the shelf. Idolizing your spouse, your children, which I think is a big one for most of us today. Yeah.
Pragmatically, you're talking about, well, number one, Israel's the size of Connecticut or New Hampshire.
Right.
the area between where Jesus' public ministry and the Sea of Galilee, 3 days walk.
Mm-hmm.
So when the disciples are chosen from the Sea of Galilee, we know that John and Andrew and Peter were from the fishing villages of Capernaum.
Mm-hmm.
We know that one was from Bethany. We've got Magdala, Bethany. We've got Capernaum. We have, over Gadarenes. I'm missing one. It'll come to me in a minute. All these cities are a short walk.
Mm-hmm.
So the disciples are pulled primarily from there, and that's home. He's back in Capernaum, and Peter's mother-in-law has a fever.
Right.
That means he's got a wife.
Right.
In fact, you can go to Peter's house. You've been there in Capernaum.
Yeah.
It's underneath this James Bond-looking Catholic church that's kind of a weird thing that's built on top of Peter's home. And it's right there by Capernaum, the house of Nahum. And so there's a synagogue there. All of it's right there, first century. So what I'm pointing out is the geography of where they lived and walked, even when they went on these missions trips where they went out in pairs.
They're coming that home. Far from home.
They're coming home, even if it's 3 or 4 days walk.
Right.
So it's not even as...
They didn't leave their wife and children for 3 years.
Them, right.
Yeah.
So yes, he's saying, love me more than the things of the world.
Yeah.
But they were going home to their home base. Now, Paul, of course, is not married.
Right.
He's a later apostle. And so he's able to focus his whole life on serving Christ. And he even talks about he could have taken a wife, but he chose not to.
Yeah.
And he also gives instruction on if you have a wife, this is how you're to treat her.
Yeah.
So he's not dismantling the family system.
Right.
So bottom line, to follow Christ as his disciple is to say, my allegiance and loyalty to him is first and foremost.
To Christ.
It's not Christ, my marriage, my job, my children, my job. It's Christ, my marriage, Christ, my job, Christ, my children. It's the idea that Christ is over all of our lives. And that's a constant battle for any person because the affections of the world are powerful.
Yeah.
And I do think it takes getting a little older before it kind of feels like, oh, this makes sense. Now, last caveat, when you come to Christ, you might be in a non-Christian context.
Yeah.
And you might share Christ with family and they may not welcome that message. That's I think a fair application that are you going to follow him even though your family's not with you? Doesn't mean to hate them. Doesn't mean you diss them.
Or you leave your spouse.
It means you are somewhat relieved. Now you still pray for them. You still hope that your life and your change of your life is a loud voice to them about, wow, he's not as arrogant as he was or whatever. He's not as much of a jerk as he or she was. Who is this Jesus? You hope that's what's going to happen.
Yeah.
But if it doesn't, do you love Christ more than these? The answer, I think, should be yes.
Yeah. All right. Well, if you've got a question for Dr. E, call us, text us, email us. The info is in your show notes. Ask Dr. E is produced by me, Hannah Seymour, mixed and mastered by Sonomorphic, and music composed by Jason Germain.